There's a man trespassing, and his associates are blocking a public throughway. Send a unit immediately." The voice on the phone, a screech I recognized all too well, was pure, distilled panic. "They're running some kind of unauthorized commercial operation right here in our community." I stood at my own front door, watching the police cruiser pull up, its lights painting my quiet cul-de-sac in flashing strokes of red and blue. The officer who stepped out looked confused, surveying the scene. My father's modest sedan, my sister's minivan, and my brother-in-law's truck, all parked neatly in my own driveway. This was Brenda, our HOA president, making good on her promise to make my life a living hell. She thought she was an untouchable queen in her little suburban kingdom. She had no idea she'd just declared war on the governor. "This story is crazy. You won't believe the ending. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from." My wife, Claire, and I had thought we'd found our forever home. It was a beautiful, two-story craftsman in a newly developed subdivision called Willow Creek Estates, a name that promised tranquility and a gentle, babbling brook that didn't actually exist. For me, a civil engineer specializing in municipal infrastructure, the house was perfect. It had solid bones, a logical layout, and was situated on a generous quarter-acre lot that backed onto a protected greenbelt. For Claire, a landscape architect, the yard was a blank canvas, a patch of earth just waiting for her to transform it into a masterpiece of native plants and serene water features. We spent years saving, meticulously planning, and climbing our respective career ladders to afford this piece of the American dream. We were planners, methodical and deliberate. It was our greatest strength, and, as it would turn out, our greatest weapon. Our first few weeks were blissful. We spent our evenings unpacking boxes and our weekends mapping out garden beds. Our neighbors seemed pleasant enough, offering polite waves from across manicured lawns. We felt a sense of belonging, a quiet satisfaction in knowing we'd made the right choice. That satisfaction lasted until the first official HOA newsletter arrived in our mailbox, a glossy, full-color affair featuring a beaming, almost unnervingly intense photo of the HOA president, Brenda McMillan. Our first face-to-face encounter with Brenda was at the community mailbox a week later. She was a woman who seemed assembled from a catalog of aspirational suburban luxury. She wore pristine white tennis attire, despite the fact our community lacked tennis courts, and her perfectly coiffed blonde hair looked as though it would shatter if touched by a breeze. A large, gaudy B initial hung from a gold chain around her neck, glinting in the sun. She drove a pristine white Range Rover, the kind that never saw a speck of mud. She approached us with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, which were scanning our property with the intensity of a predator surveying its territory. "Welcome to Willow Creek," she'd said, her voice smooth but with an undercurrent of something sharp and metallic. "I'm Brenda. As you know, I'm the president of the Homeowners Association. We have a very high standard to maintain here, which is why our property values are the best in the county." She handed us a welcome basket that felt more like a warning. Tucked inside, amongst a few bland crackers and a jar of generic jam, was a neatly bound 200-page copy of the HOA covenants, conditions, and restrictions. A single sentence was highlighted in lurid pink. "All exterior modifications, including landscaping and planting, require prior written approval from the Architectural Review Committee." Claire, holding the basket, just smiled graciously. "Thank you so much," she said. "We're looking forward to being part of the community." Brenda's eyes flickered to the small potted Japanese maple we'd placed by our front door. "That's a lovely tree," she said, the slight hesitation telling us everything we needed to know. "You'll want to submit a form for that, of course, just to keep everything in order." This was for a pot, a movable pot. We were civil engineers and landscape architects. We understood rules, regulations, and the importance of planning. But this felt different. This felt less like maintaining standards and more like exercising control for its own sake. It was our first red flag, a small pennant fluttering in the wind that would soon become a full-blown hurricane. The early warnings were subtle, a form of low-grade psychological warfare. Brenda had a network, a small group of what we came to call her lieutenants, who seemed to have nothing better to do than patrol the neighborhood and report back to their queen. One of our neighbors, a quiet, retired librarian named George, had quietly advised us during a brief chat over the fence, "Just be careful with Brenda," he'd whispered, glancing around nervously. "She runs this place like her own personal fiefdom. The board just rubber stamps whatever she wants. Cross her, and she'll make your life miserable." We thanked him for the advice, not yet understanding the full scope of what he was describing. The first official violation notice came a month later. It was a crisp, formal letter, complete with the HOA letterhead, citing us for improper lawn maintenance. The specific violation? A single, defiant dandelion had dared to sprout near our driveway. I was holding the letter, reading it with a mixture of amusement and disbelief, when Claire came home from her studio. I showed it to her, and she laughed. "A dandelion? Seriously? She knows I'm a landscape architect, right? This is professionally embarrassing." We plucked the offending weed, took a time-stamped photo of the now pristine patch of grass, and emailed it to the official HOA compliance address, with a polite, almost painfully cheerful note. The response was a terse, "Thank you for your prompt compliance. No apology for the absurdity, no acknowledgement of the pettiness." It was the bureaucratic equivalent of a cold stare. We were learning the rules of the game. Logic and reason were not welcome here. Only absolute, unquestioning obedience would suffice. That was a game neither of us was inclined to play. The conflict began to escalate. Brenda's enablers on the board, a trio of spineless sycophants who seemed to bask in the glow of her reflected power, were no help. There was Marcus, a flustered insurance salesman who agreed with everything she said. Carol, a woman whose entire personality seemed to be wine mom. And Dale, a perpetually confused-looking man who clearly just wanted to get through meetings so he could get back to his model trains. We attended an HOA meeting once, hoping to inject a dose of sanity. It was a surreal experience. Brenda sat at the head of a long table in the sterile community clubhouse, reigning over the proceedings like a benevolent dictator. When a resident tried to question a sudden increase in monthly dues, Brenda shut him down with a condescending lecture about fiscal responsibility and maintaining our community's prestige. The man, a retired accountant, tried to point out irregularities in the budget report, but Brenda simply talked over him, her voice rising in volume and indignation until he finally slumped back in his chair, defeated. Marcus, Carol, and Dale just nodded along, their faces masks of placid agreement. We saw it then. This wasn't a community organization. It was a cult of personality, and Brenda was its charismatic, if deeply unpleasant, leader. We decided to lay low, to comply with the ridiculous rules to the letter, all while documenting every single interaction. My engineering mind kicked into gear. Data would be key. I started a private log, a detailed spreadsheet recording every email, every notice, every passive-aggressive comment. I noted dates, times, specific rule citations, and our response. It felt like I was preparing a professional report on structural failure, except the structure was our neighborhood's social fabric, and the stress fractures were being caused by one woman's insatiable ego. Claire, for her part, channeled her frustration into her work. Our yard was becoming a masterpiece, but a fully compliant one. Every plant, every stone, every piece of decorative gravel was submitted on the proper form, approved in writing by the Architectural Review Committee, which was, of course, chaired by Brenda, and installed with exacting precision. Our compliance seemed to infuriate Brenda more than defiance would have. She couldn't fault us, but she clearly hated that we weren't intimidated. She would drive by our house, slowing her Range Rover to a crawl, her face a mask of sour disapproval, as she surveyed our flawless, board-approved landscaping. We were playing her game better than she was, and it was driving her mad. The quiet war of attrition was about to turn hot. The final catalyst wasn't a dandelion or a misplaced garden gnome. It was my family. It was the day my father came to visit. The campaign of petty tyranny ramped up over the next few months, each new infraction more ludicrous than the last. We received a notice that the color of our welcome mata, tasteful, earthy brown, was not on the approved palette of neutral colors. We were informed via a passive-aggressive email, CC'd to the entire board, that our trash receptacles were visible from the street for a full 45 minutes past the 9 a.m. collection time on a Tuesday. The email included a time-stamped photo, presumably taken by Brenda herself from the window of her Range Rover during one of her morning patrols. Each time, we complied with a saccharine-sweet politeness that I knew must have grated on her. We replaced the mat with a compliant, soul-crushingly beige one. We set a recurring alarm on our phones to ensure the trash cans were retrieved with military precision. We were the model residents, the paragons of compliance. But our cheerful adherence to her despotic rules only seemed to fuel her rage. She needed subjects to cower, not to excel within her system. Claire and I had a running gallows humor bet on what the next violation would be. Claire guessed unauthorized bird feeder placement. I went with excessively vibrant flower blooms. We were both wrong. The target of her next attack wasn't our property. It was our family. My family is close-knit but geographically scattered. My father, a man who had dedicated his life to public service, had recently been elected governor of the state. It was a source of immense pride for all of us. Though he was still just Dad to Meath man who taught me how to fish and who still told the same terrible jokes he'd been telling for 30 years. My sister, her husband, and their 2 young children lived a few states over. We hadn't all been together in one place in over a year, and we had planned a big family reunion and a belated celebration for my dad's victory at our new house. We wanted to christen the place with laughter and the kind of happy chaos only family can bring. Claire and I had spent weeks preparing. The house was spotless, the guest rooms were ready, and Claire had designed a stunning, though fully HOA-compliant, floral arrangement for the dining room table. The big weekend finally arrived. My sister's family pulled in first, their minivan, a testament to suburban parenthood, filled with car seats, stray goldfish crackers, and the general detritus of life, with kids under 10. An hour later, my father arrived. He drove himself, as he often did for personal trips, in his understated American-made sedan. There was no security detail for a quiet family visit, a fact he insisted upon to maintain a semblance of normalcy. We directed everyone to park in our driveway. It was a spacious 3-car-wide affair, and I, being the meticulous engineer, made sure all 3 vehicles were parked neatly, well within the property lines, and not obstructing the sidewalk in any way. We were a picture of domestic bliss, hugging on the lawn, the kids immediately starting a game of tag in the backyard. The air was filled with joy. And then, I saw it. The slow, predatory crawl of the white Range Rover down the street. Brenda didn't even get out of her car at first. She simply stopped in front of our house, her window gliding down with a soft whir. She stared, her perfectly made-up face contorted into a mask of righteous indignation. She wasn't looking at us, the happy family reuniting. She was looking at the cars. The minivan, the truck, the sedan, 3 vehicles in one driveway. In her mind, this was not a family gathering. This was a flagrant violation. My father, ever the diplomat, gave her a friendly wave. Brenda ignored it. Her eyes narrowed, and I could see her reaching for her phone. I knew with a sinking feeling what was coming next. Claire saw it too and squeezed my hand. "Don't let her ruin this," she whispered. I tried. We ushered everyone inside, closed the door, and did our best to ignore the malevolent presence parked at the end of our driveway. We opened presents, my nieces squealing with delight. We toasted my dad's success, but a shadow had been cast. Less than 20 minutes later, the doorbell rang. It wasn't Brenda. It was 2 police officers. My heart sank. Through the peephole, I could see Brenda standing on the sidewalk behind them, arms crossed, a smug, triumphant look on her face. This was her checkmate. I opened the door. One of the officers, a young man who looked barely out of his 20s, cleared his throat nervously. "Sir, we received a call about a disturbance," he began, his eyes flicking past me to the 3 cars in the driveway, "and a report of a possible unpermitted commercial business being run from this residence." I was speechless. A commercial business. I looked at my brother-in-law, an accountant, who was currently on the floor making roaring noises with my 5-year-old nephew. I looked at my sister, a school teacher, who was helping my niece assemble a complex Lego castle. I looked at my father, the governor of the state, who was happily accepting a crayon drawing of a lopsided house. This was the unauthorized commercial operation Brenda had reported. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it was almost impressive. The senior officer, a tired-looking man with a thick mustache, spoke up. "The complainant, a Miss Brenda McMillan," he said, gesturing with his thumb towards the sidewalk Karen, "stated that you have an excessive number of vehicles, indicating a commercial activity, and that they are blocking access." I could feel the anger rising in my chest, a hot, coiling serpent. I prided myself on my patience, on my methodical nature, but this was a personal attack. She had weaponized the police to harass my family. "Officer," I said, my voice dangerously calm, "every single vehicle is parked legally inside my property lines. This is my family. They are here for a visit. You are looking at a teacher, an accountant, and their children. This is not a commercial enterprise. This is a grandmother and a grandfather visiting their grandchildren." Brenda, sensing her moment of triumph, strode forward. "They are lying," she declared, her voice ringing with performative outrage. "Willow Creek has standards. We don't allow this kind of element here. People running businesses from their driveways. It brings down the whole tone of the community." She pointed a finger tipped with a blood-red nail at my dad's sedan. "That one has been parked there for almost an hour. It's practically abandoned." The younger officer, trying to de-escalate, turned to me. "Sir, if you could just ask your associates to move their vehicles, we can be on our way." The word associates was the final straw. It was time to end this. It was then that my father, who had been listening quietly from the doorway, decided to step forward. The real fun was about to begin. My dad stepped out onto the porch, moving with a calm deliberation that I knew from a lifetime of experience preceded a moment of absolute quiet authority. He wasn't a large man, but he had a presence, an air of measured gravity that made people listen. He had on a simple polo shirt and a pair of slacks, looking every bit the unassuming grandfather he was in that moment. Brenda didn't even recognize him. To her, he was just another one of the element, sullying her perfect suburban streetscape. "Good afternoon, officers," he said, his voice even and pleasant. He nodded at them respectfully. "There seems to be a misunderstanding," Brenda scoffed, a short, ugly sound. "The only misunderstanding is why you people think you can just ignore our community's rules." She spat, directing her venom at my father. "This isn't some public park." The senior officer, sensing the need to assert some control, addressed my dad. "Sir, if you're the owner of one of these vehicles, we just need you to cooperate. We've had a complaint from the head of the Homeowners Association." He gestured towards Brenda, who puffed up with self-importance. My dad gave her a long, slow look. It was a look I'd seen him give political opponents across a debate, not angry, but deeply, profoundly disappointed. It was far more devastating than any shout. He then turned his full attention back to the officers. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out his wallet. The officers tensed slightly, a conditioned response. But he didn't go for a driver's license. He produced his official state identification. "I believe this vehicle," he said, pointing to the sedan Brenda had called abandoned, "is the one causing the most concern. It belongs to me." He handed his ID to the senior officer. The officer took it, glanced down, and then froze. His eyes widened, and a slow flush crept up his neck, disappearing into his hairline. He looked from the ID to my father's face, then back to the ID. He swallowed hard. His partner, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, leaned over to look. His jaw went slack. On the sidewalk, Brenda was still mid-rant. And, furthermore, the bylaws are perfectly clear about nuisance activities. Section 7, Paragraph B explicitly prohibits anything that detracts from the aesthetic harmony of the community. The senior officer slowly, almost reverently, handed the ID back to my dad. "Governor," he said, his voice now a strained, respectful whisper. "I am so sorry, sir. We had no idea." Brenda's rant faltered. The word governor hung in the air, seeming to suck all the oxygen out of the quiet street. Her head whipped around, her eyes locking onto my dad. The smug, triumphant expression on her face melted away, replaced by a ghastly tableau of shock, confusion, and dawning gut-wrenching horror. Her mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish gasping for air. "Governor?" she croaked, the word a faint, pathetic squeak. My father's pleasant demeanor didn't change, but his eyes were now hard as steel. He looked at the officers. "Gentlemen, you're just doing your job based on the information you were given," he said kindly. "But I have to say, I'm deeply concerned about this apparent misuse of police resources. My son and his wife are law-abiding citizens. My family and I are here for a quiet visit. We were just accused of running a criminal enterprise and blocking a public way, all because our cars are parked, completely legally, in his private driveway." He then turned that steel, hard gaze onto Brenda. She visibly flinched. "Ma'am," he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "You made a very serious and, frankly, slanderous accusation. You have wasted the valuable time of these officers, and you have harassed my family. I have dedicated my career to public service and the rule of law. What you have done here today is an abuse of both." The transformation in the two policemen was instantaneous. They now looked at Brenda not as a concerned citizen, but as a crank who had dragged them into a political minefield. The senior officer shot her a look of pure fury. "Ma Millen," he said, his voice dripping with ice. "Making a false report is a serious offense." Brenda was crumbling. Her face had gone from chalk white to a blotchy red. The queen had been dethroned in a matter of seconds, and in front of an audience, she started stammering, trying to backpedal. I didn't know. I was just trying to uphold the rules, the community, the standards." My dad cut her off, not by raising his voice, but by simply speaking. "The standards of decency, ma'am? The standard of welcoming a family to a new home? Or perhaps the standard of not bearing false witness against your neighbor?" Each question was a quiet, verbal blow. The officers, wanting nothing more than to be 1,000,000 miles away, began their retreat. "Again, Governor, our deepest apologies for the disturbance," the senior officer said, practically bowing. "We'll be sure to have a word with the dispatch about properly vetting these kinds of calls. It won't happen again." They got in their cruiser and drove away, leaving Brenda standing alone on the sidewalk, utterly humiliated. My sister, who had been watching from the window, let out a slow whistle. Claire came and stood next to me, a fierce, triumphant smile on her face. My brother-in-law was trying, and failing, to hide a grin. The battle was over. Brenda had been publicly and comprehensively defeated. As she turned, her face a mess of ruined makeup and impotent rage, and scurried back to her Range Rover, I should have felt pure satisfaction. And I did, for a moment. But as I watched her drive away, I realized that embarrassing her wasn't enough. A woman like that doesn't learn from humility. She just learns to be more vindictive. The problem wasn't just Brenda. It was the system that gave her unchecked power. The HOA itself was the disease, and she was just the most virulent symptom. Standing there on my porch, with my family behind me, I made a decision. I wasn't going to just play her game anymore. I was going to change the rules. I was going to dismantle her kingdom from the inside out, using the very tools she worshipped: the bylaws, the budget, and the cold, hard letter of the law. My professional life was about building things. Now, I was going to apply those same skills to a meticulous, calculated, and glorious demolition. The immediate aftermath of the showdown was a profound and deeply satisfying silence. The cul-de-sac seemed to exhale. The ghost of the flashing police lights faded, leaving only the warm afternoon sun. Inside, the mood had shifted from tense anxiety to giddy relief. My nieces were blissfully unaware, still engrossed in their Lego castle, but the adults were buzzing. My brother-in-law, the accountant, clapped me on the back. I've never seen anyone crumple that fast, he said, laughing. You could practically hear the air rushing out of her ego. My sister was shaking her head in disbelief. Only Dad could defuse a situation with a wallet. My father, however, was not celebrating. He looked troubled. Later that evening, after the kids were in bed and we were all relaxing on the back patio, perfectly HOA compliant of course, back patio, brought it up. Son, he said, swirling the ice in his glass, that woman, Brenda, this isn't just about her being a difficult neighbor. This is a sickness. It's an abuse of power, plain and simple. She's created a tiny, unaccountable government, and she's using it to bully people. He looked at me, his expression serious. These HOAs. They're becoming a shadow government in a lot of places. They have the power to fine, to put liens on homes, to dictate people's lives, often with very little oversight. Coming from him, a man who lived and breathed governance and civic structure, the words carried enormous weight. What she did today, he continued, calling the police with a fabricated story that crosses a line. She didn't just waste police time. She used a public service as her own private enforcement arm. It's fundamentally wrong. He was right, and his words solidified the resolve that had been hardening in my gut. My anger was no longer just personal. It was professional. As a civil engineer, I design systems that are meant to work for people, roads, water systems, public works. They are built on codes, regulations, and principles of public trust. The Willow Creek HOA, under Brenda's rule, was a failed system. It was corrupt, inefficient, and fundamentally unjust. It wasn't serving the community, it was serving the ego of one tyrannical woman and her coterie of enablers. That night, after everyone else had gone to bed, Claire and I stayed up talking. She, as a landscape architect, dealt with zoning boards, planning commissions, and community design guidelines all the time. She understood the language of bylaws and covenants, as well as I understood the language of load-bearing capacities and soil mechanics. She has to have overstepped, Claire said, her eyes alight with a familiar strategic fire. People like that. They always do. They get so high on their own power they think the rules don't apply to them, only to others. We decided then and there to launch a full-scale investigation. This would not be an emotional crusade. It would be a forensic audit. We would approach it like a professional project. Our goal was not just to remove Brenda, but to reform the entire system and return power to the homeowners. My revenge would be her utter ruin, built not on insults or public shouting matches, but on a mountain of irrefutable data. The first step was to gather intelligence. Under state law and the HOA's own governing documents, every homeowner had the right to inspect the association's records. The next morning, I drafted a formal, polite, but legally precise email to the HOA board addressing it to the generic board email address, but knowing full well Brenda would be the one reading it. I requested access to the last 5 years of financial records, including detailed budget reports, expense receipts, bank statements, all signed contracts with vendors, and the minutes from every board meeting. It was a massive request, designed to be overwhelming, but every single item was something I was legally entitled to see. I cited the specific articles in the bylaws and the relevant state statutes that guaranteed my right to access. I gave them 7 business days to comply, as stipulated by the law. The response came back in less than an hour, not from the board's email, but directly from Brenda's personal address. It was dripping with condescension. While we appreciate your sudden interest in civic matters, she wrote, the board considers such a broad and burdensome request to be harassing in nature. We will make the approved annual budget summaries available at the next scheduled community meeting. She had just made her first critical mistake. She had denied me my legal right in writing. I saved the email, printed it, and placed it in a new binder I had labeled Project Chimera, after the mythological monster made of disparate and ill-fitting parts. It seemed fitting. While I waited for the inevitable legal battle over the documents, Claire and I started the groundwork. We went for long walks around the neighborhood, not as homeowners, but as surveyors. Claire took notes on landscaping specifically, the large-scale projects. The new trees planted in the common areas, the flower beds at the community entrance, the lawn care for the small park. It's all the same company, she noted after a few days. Willowbow Landscaping. Every single project. She pointed out their trucks one morning. Their work is okay, but it's overpriced for what it is. The mulch is cheap, the plantings are sparse. For the money a community this size should be spending, this should look like a botanical garden. On a hunch, I did a state business registry search for Willowbow Landscaping. The owner was listed as one Roger McMillan. A quick social media search confirmed it. Roger was Brenda's brother-in-law. It was a classic case of self-dealing, a blatant conflict of interest. The contract had almost certainly been awarded without a competitive bidding process, a direct violation of a clause in our own bylaws that required a minimum of 3 bids for any project over 50. This was the first major crack in her fortress. Meanwhile, I focused on the infrastructure. I took a closer look at a recent road resurfacing project that had cost the community a staggering sum according to the last budget summary Brenda had so graciously offered. As an engineer who had managed multi-million-dollar public works projects, the cost seemed wildly inflated for a simple asphalt overlay on a few small residential streets. I discreetly took a few core samples from a discrete corner of the road. It wasn't a full professional analysis, but I could tell from sight and feel. The depth of the new asphalt was less than half of what would be considered standard for the price paid. We had been billed for a full-depth reconstruction and received a cheap, cosmetic facelift that would start crumbling in a few years. The evidence was piling up. Brenda wasn't just a bully, she was a grifter. She wasn't running an HOA, she was running a racket, funneling our dues into her family's pockets and funding shoddy work. The binder I labeled Project Chimera was getting thicker by the day. She thought she'd humiliated me by calling the cops. She had no idea she had just handed me the blueprints to her own destruction. Brenda's official denial of my records request was the legal ammunition I needed. I didn't argue or send angry emails. I simply forwarded her denial, along with my original request and the relevant citations from the law, to a lawyer friend of mine who specialized in corporate litigation. He drafted a stern, formal letter to the HOA board on his firm's letterhead, informing them they were in breach of state law and their own governing documents. The letter stated that if the requested records were not made available for my inspection within 72 hours, we would be filing a lawsuit to compel their release and would be seeking all associated legal fees from the board members personally. The mention of personal liability was the key. While enablers like Marcus, Carol, and Dale were happy to ride Brenda's coattails when it was easy, the prospect of having to pay a lawyer out of their own pockets to defend her illegal stonewalling would be a different matter entirely. Suddenly, the fortress wall showed another crack. 2 days later, I received a flustered call from Marcus, the insurance salesman. "Look," he stammered, his voice filled with panic. "Brenda is very particular. But we don't want any legal trouble. The records will be made available. She's not happy about it, but the board has voted. You can come by the clubhouse on Friday to review them." It was a victory, but I knew it was only the beginning. Brenda wouldn't just hand over a ledger showing her own corruption. She would obstruct, obfuscate, and hide whatever she could. Friday came, and Claire and I went to the clubhouse together. We arrived to find Brenda sitting behind a desk, a smug look on her face. Piled on the table in front of her were 10 large, disorganized cardboard boxes. There was no order, no labels, just a chaotic mountain of paper. Receipts were mixed with invoices, bank statements were jumbled with meeting minutes, and contracts were shoved in with random correspondence. It was a classic document dump, a tactic designed to make the task of finding anything meaningful so overwhelming that the person gives up. "It's all there," Brenda said, gesturing to the mess with a sweep of her hand. "As you requested, 5 years of records. Have fun." She thought she'd won. She was counting on our frustration. She underestimated us. She saw a civil engineer and a landscape architect. She didn't see 2 professionals who spent their lives sifting through complex data sets blueprints, and project files to find precise information. This wasn't a punishment. For us, it was just another day at the office. We had come prepared. We brought a portable document scanner, a laptop, and 3 empty file boxes with color-coded folders. Without a word, we set up our workstation. I looked at Brenda and smiled politely. "Thank you, Brenda. We'll be as quick as we can. We wouldn't want to be a bother." Her smile faltered slightly. This wasn't the defeated reaction she was expecting. We spent the next 8 hours in that sterile, air-conditioned clubhouse, methodically working our way through the mountain of paper. It was a silent, intense ballet of 2 people perfectly in sync. Claire would pull a document from the pile, identify it, and hand it to me. I would flatten it, run it through the scanner, name the digital file according to our pre-established convention, and then place the physical copy into the appropriate color-coded folder. Red for contracts, blue for financials, green for meeting minutes, yellow for correspondence. Brenda sat there the entire time, pretending to work on her laptop, but I could feel her eyes on us. Her aura of smug superiority slowly curdled into one of agitated impatience. She thought we'd get bored after an hour or two. She didn't realize that for people like us, finding order in chaos is a source of profound satisfaction. It's what we do. By the end of the day, we had scanned and organized every single scrap of paper. 10 chaotic boxes had been transformed into a meticulously organized digital archive on my encrypted hard drive, and 3 neatly labeled file boxes. As we packed up our gear, I turned to Brenda. "Thanks again for your cooperation," I said, my voice still infuriatingly pleasant. "This has been incredibly illuminating." The look on her face was a mixture of hatred and confusion. She had given us the haystack, convinced we would never find the needle. She didn't realize we were bringing an industrial-grade magnet. That weekend was a blur of data analysis. We spread out on our dining room table, our laptops open, the digital files organized before us. The picture that emerged was worse than I had imagined. It wasn't just incompetence or petty tyranny. It was systemic, deliberate fraud. Claire's hunch about the landscaping was dead on. Willow Bough Landscaping, owned by Brenda's brother-in-law Roger, had been the exclusive provider of all landscaping services for the past 4 years, ever since Brenda became president. The initial contract was barely a page long, vague and open-ended. The subsequent invoices were astronomical. She was paying Roger's company nearly double the market rate for basic services like mowing and mulching. We cross-referenced the invoices with our own research. Claire got quotes from 3 other highly rated commercial landscaping companies for the exact same services and property size. The lowest bid was 45% less than what Brenda was paying her brother-in-law. Over 4 years, we calculated that she had funneled over $150,000 in excess payments to her own family member, paid for directly by our HOA dues. But the landscaping was just the beginning. I dove into the road resurfacing project. The invoice from Asphalt Kings Paving was for $80,000. It detailed a full 4-inch asphalt application. I cross-referenced the company with the state business registry. It had been formed only 2 months before the project began. The address listed for the company was a P.O. box in a town 50 miles away. The phone number went to a disconnected line. It was a shell company. I then pulled the HOA's bank statements and found the canceled check for $80,000. It had been co-signed, as required, by Brenda and the treasurer at the time, Dale, the perpetually confused man who loved model trains. But the endorsement signature on the back of the check was almost illegibly scribbled. Almost. I blew up the scanned image, enhanced the contrast, and compared it to other signatures I had in the files. The looping M and the sharple were unmistakable. It was Brenda's own signature. She hadn't even bothered to have someone else endorse it. She had paid a shell company, likely one she herself controlled, for work that was substandard and vastly overpriced, and then endorsed the check herself. This wasn't just breaking bylaws. This was embezzlement. This was wire fraud. This was a criminal enterprise hiding in plain sight, disguised as a homeowners association. I now had the needle. In fact, I had a whole handful of them. The next step was to prepare the presentation. It was time to schedule a community meeting. It was time to show everyone the monster that lived among them.